Everybody's talking to Frank, and he listens. Mid-mornings on U105 with Frank Mitchell.
No, I'll get round to your texts and emails, more of them shortly. There are other things to get on to the programme as well. Social housing residents, indeed, in North Belfast, will be meeting with some representatives who are going to be lobbying on their behalf. And indeed, they've been speaking to the SDLP's social housing spokesperson and representative in the Assembly, the Social Development Committee member Dolores Kelly. They're presenting over a year's worth of research into poor housing conditions in areas of North Belfast. And I want to speak to Sean Brady about this with regards to the research that has been done. Sean, good morning.
Good morning, Frank.
Sean, are we talking particularly about, is it the 7 towers, the big towers there in the New Lodge area? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, well, the 7 towers would be the hard end of the research, but it's branched out to cover areas in Harbourview, Pilot Street and the wider New Lodge. So
there's a suggestion here that there's religious discrimination involved.
Yeah, well, I think we're past the suggestion stage with the religious discrimination. I mean, the UN, the Council of Europe, even the Children's Commissioner this year was out visiting the tower blocks and raising the issue that children shouldn't be living in conditions like she had witnessed in the 21st century. The problem is dealing with it. You know, the priority issue of religious inequality in housing, particularly affecting the Catholic community in North Belfast, isn't being dealt with. There is no strategy to address it, and it continues to be compounded by the fact that there's no strategy to address it.
But is there a strategy to address the Protestant people who are living in difficult conditions in North Belfast?
Again, this is an issue that's constantly raised. It isn't one or the other. There are 2 different sets of need in North Belfast. The turnover of housing in Protestant areas in North Belfast is dealing with housing demand, but that doesn't negate the fact that there's massive need in terms of dereliction and housing disrepair and all of that. The problem with housing inequality, particularly affecting the Catholic community, is that there are not enough houses to meet the need. So you have overcrowding, you have families like those residents who've been meeting with Dolores Kelly today with their research, who are waiting for years on the housing waiting list, unable to access a property, and if they do, they're accessing properties that are in serious disrepair, some of whom are right back on the waiting list again, haven't been brought out of those properties. But
this research really has a go at the DSD Minister Nelson McCausland. It basically says any objective analysis or examination of the facts can come to only one conclusion: Catholics in need of housing are being discriminated against. The return by Minister McCausland of up to 50 million in recent monitoring rounds is nothing short of 21st century gerrymandering in the wake of former DUP leader Ian Paisley's admission that the denial of housing for Catholics, which sparked the civil rights movement, was wrong. The Social Development Minister's energies would be better spent robustly challenging the inequalities which continue to plague housing allocation in the north, rather than handing back money earmarked for housing in the first place. That's a real Catholic, nationalist, Republican area go at a DUP minister.
Well, those are Dolores Kelly's remarks, and I think it's actually welcome to see that our political representatives, not just those in North Belfast and localised around the issue, but those in the executive, are going to begin to prioritise this. Again, those are Dolores Kelly's remarks. What I would say is that the residents for the last 7 years have been campaigning year on year on year to have problems recognised and problems addressed, particularly problems affecting Catholic families in North Belfast. It's not an issue that's going to go away. It's not an issue that's going to be addressed in any other way than to develop a strategy and a resource time-bound finance strategy to address it. And it'll come up time and time and time again. The problem with the minister at the minute is that he has now reneged on a long-standing commitment to meet with the group in a human rights monitoring group, which has been lauded by the United Nations as a best practice example of how rights holders can claim their rights. He has pulled back from that, and he has pulled back from it on the basis of saying that he doesn't accept that there's religious inequality in North Belfast. So that's where the residents are left. They are left with no engagement with the minister, no avenue for engagement with the minister, no ability to bring their issues to the minister's table, and have now approached Dolores Kelly of the Social Development Committee to do that for them, to put it on the Social Development Committee's agenda and the Executive's agenda as a priority issue in North Belfast and beyond North Belfast.
Yes, this report, commonly referred to as the PPR report, Participation and Practice of Rights Organisation. How bad is it for residents in, for example, the Towers?
The report that's been released today is the residents' report. We released a report 5 months ago chronicling 10 years of failure to address the issues. The residents themselves have carried out this research. It's 260 residents involved in the research, in-depth analysis. The problems that people face, I'll give you an example of one resident, the one who approached Dolores Kelly in November. She was on the housing waiting list as almost a year and a half. Her name's Arlene. She was on the housing waiting list, accepted the first offer that came her way because she was on her mother's settee with their 2 children. She's now pregnant with her 3rd. She was put into a house with no heating system that was still being tested for asbestos and has now been taken out of that property on the 3rd floor of a high-rise complex and is now on her mother's settee and spent on the time on her mother's settee over Christmas again. She now has less points than she had when she moved into the property originally, and that's despite the fact that the housing executive have apologised to her. That's indicative of the 260 other people who have been surveyed, talked to, have been gathering evidence in this research and have been presenting it not just this year but every year for the last 7 years.
Is there any progress being made with regards to redevelopment there?
In the 7 towers, particularly?
Yes, in that general area, certainly the towers. Is there any plan to take the towers down? Is any of that on the longer finger? Again,
what you have is there's been £133 million spent on housing in North Belfast in the last umpteen years. The problem is that it isn't addressing the problems. I'll give you another anecdotal example. Angie, who's meeting with Dolores Kelly today, fighting to have disability access installed at her house for the last 2 years. They keep coming out and dealing with minor issues around the problem at an extreme cost to the public purse, on a weekly basis, fixing the security gate. At the end of the day, they've spent more money now than it cost installing the thing in the first place, rather than installing something that works well to begin with. And the way you do that is to engage with the real experts in housing, the people who are living there. And that's what the residents are asking for. The residents are asking, listen to what we're telling you, look at what we're showing you, have a look at our evidence, hear our stories, and on that basis, engage with us to come up with plans to tackle these issues. Don't foist plans on top of us.
But is there universal support for the removal of the towers, or do people want to see the towers remain?
Amongst residents, it'd be mixed views. I mean, the towers may well be, if they could be fixed up to an acceptable standard, may well be acceptable for certain types of residents. But I'll tell you what they aren't acceptable for: families. And there are families now living in the tower blocks. 39 families were surveyed in this piece of research, and those families shouldn't be living there. Even the housing executive themselves recognise that children and families shouldn't be housed in that type of accommodation. You have the overflow then and knock-on effect with Harbourview Apartments having been built 5 years ago and run by Clanmill. What you have down there now are hundreds of families in the same situation in a 4-storey high-rise complex, and those people are up against all the same issues that you see in the tower blocks, all the same issues with children running the corridors and running the hallways of institutional housing complexes with nowhere to play, surrounded by motorways. And these are the problems that continue to be exacerbated. So money is being spent moving a problem from one place to another.
So if you, as a local development worker with PPR, if you could wave a magic wand and create housing in that area for people in the blocks and people in the surrounding area, where would you build it? What would it be?
Again, more than us, more than PPR, have identified all the potential options for housing. Girdwood is one that has come and gone. There was a potential for 220. It's now been reduced to 60. You have the harbour. You have a whole host of areas that are moving into developmental potential for housing. What needs to happen is that the priority from the DSD needs to be to build those houses and to house those people who are in need in those houses.
OK, Sean Brady, thank you very much indeed. I want to speak to Dolores Kelly, who we've referred to a couple of times since the start of the chat on the SDLP. Dolores Kelly, good morning.
Good morning, Frank.
You're meeting these people and they're certainly less than happy with the situation that they're in at the moment. And you've had a real pop at the Minister on this one, right along sectarian lines.
Well, if any objective observer examines the facts, 27 acres of former military site at Girdwood was handed over to the Northern Ireland Executive over 7 years ago. And as Sean rightly pointed out, under Alex Abbott, Margaret Ritchie, there were plans to build 220 of those 220 houses initially on that site. That has now been reduced to 60. And Frank, can I tell you that I made inquiries and tabled questions in relation to the planning application, at least to get some houses onto that site. And it turns out that the application from DSD is such a poor application in terms of trying to put too many houses, even though it's only the 60, onto too small a site, that it's actually been initially refused by planners. So it's back to the drawing board in relation to that. And in the meantime, people are living in horrendous conditions, and they have been on waiting lists for 2 years and more.
But
and
do you want Gerwood to? But do you want Gerwood to be a Catholic estate?
Well, that's not what was envisaged for Gerwood. I think all of the parties would want to see a shared space. But the housing should be on the basis of objective need. And in North Belfast, on that criteria, the greatest need for housing is amongst the Catholic population. I think we all want to move to greater shared and integrated facilities and shared space. But the reality is, in North Belfast, people have been waiting far too long and living in dreadful conditions that would be unacceptable elsewhere in any other functioning democracy. And there is a perception and indeed a suspicion, not only amongst the community in North Belfast, but in other areas, that this is as much to do with looking at any electoral analysis forecast in relation to that particular area of North Belfast, and indeed looking at whether or not people are trying to even protect parade routes. I mean, that's the level of suspicion that is within that community as to the reasons why we are not seeing any progress. I mean, why should housing on the basis of objective need for people who are vulnerable and for young families be a divisive matter? Why should that be?
And that's why you've been saying that any objective analysis or examination of the facts can come to only one conclusion: Catholics in need of housing are being discriminated against. You said the return by the DSD Minister Nelson McCausland of up to 50 million in recent monitoring rounds is nothing short of what you've just alluded to there, 21st century gerrymandering. Now, the Minister, we did ask him to come on the programme. He wasn't available, but he has said in a statement the department has not had sight of the research referred to this morning, so cannot comment specifically. However, it does seem to follow in the same vein as the PPR report Equality Can't Wait, which presented a misleading impression of the very complex housing issues of North Belfast. The department does not accept the accusations of religious discrimination in housing. The stats used in the press release are used selectively, as in the PPR report. Statistics can be applied to different geographic areas such as councils, housing executive districts or constituencies. For example, taking the statistics of the North Belfast constituency area that you've referred to as a whole, the figures provide a different analysis of need, with similar numbers of Protestants and Catholics on the social housing waiting list. Is that not a fair analysis of it?
No, it's not, and I think the Minister can't defend the indefensible. Why have the number of proposed dwellings on the Gerwood been reduced from 220 to 60, from the handover and the assumption of responsibility for housing passed from the SDLP to the DUP? Why is that? And secondly, the report, when you get an opportunity to have a look at it, will tell you how the housing executive in recent years has actually changed how statistics are recorded. And another point is, if there are the same number of people within the Protestant community looking at houses, why not build the houses then on the Gerwood site? There are 27 acres. 27 acres, Frank. And in the last 3 months alone, £10 million being handed back should have been spent on social housing, and £7 million, Frank, on maintenance. And yet we're hearing how residents who actually are lucky enough to have a home but are living in damp conditions, and fuel poverty is on the rise. So I can't understand why this would happen, except to say that it's been a failure both by the Minister and DSD in terms of getting to grip with this problem, and that the Executive now needs to turn its attention to the housing crisis, not only in North Belfast but in other areas across the north.
OK, Dolores Kelly, thank you for your time this morning. Thank you.